I had the great pleasure tonight to introduce a very special person, Senator Ben Cardin, our senior U.S. Senator representing the state of Maryland. And many of us have known Senator Cardin for some years, for many years, and have supported him. We're thrilled that he could join us tonight for this Knesset Club program in support of our Federation's annual campaign. Senator Cardin and his family, I think as many of you know, have deep roots in Baltimore. A third generation Marylander, Ben has been a national leader on healthcare, retirement security, the environment, fiscal issues. He has worked across party lines to further U.S. national security and to ensure that good governance, transparency, and respect for human rights are integrated into American foreign policy efforts. And there is no one in Congress who is more supportive of a strong and vibrant U.S.-Israel relationship. Ben has had a distinguished career as an elected official beginning in 1967 when he was a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. He later represented Maryland's 3rd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he served on the House Ways and Means Committee for 17 years. He was first elected to the Senate in 2006 and serves as ranking member of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. He's also a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Environment and Public Works Committee, and also serves on the Finance Committee. During his career in Congress, Ben has been a leading advocate for the Chesapeake Bay, as well as for clean air and clean water. In the business arena, he was responsible for the extension of increased guarantees and reduced fees in the Small Business Administration, as well as expanding access to contracts for women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. He's also a strong proponent of the Affordable Care Act, increased medical research funding, the rights of patients, civil rights and civil liberties, and ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. Hooray. As we all know, Ben has a long-lasting interest in foreign affairs and has worked across party lines, again, to further our national security and protect universal human rights. He's been a commissioner on the U.S. Helsinki Commission since 1993, serving twice as the chairman. So Ben, we look forward to hearing from you, not only about the incoming Biden administration and your legislative priorities, but also about your deep commitment to the Jewish people and Israel. And one more thing before we start, I'd like to ask all of our attendees here, our Knesset members, if you have questions, which you may well have when you're listening to Senator Cardin, if you could use the chat function. I think some of you have already used it tonight. It's at the bottom of your screen. And you can use the chat function to submit questions. While the senator's talking, and then later he's agreed to answer questions after his remarks are completed. So with that instruction, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Ben Cardin.
Well, Betsy, first of all, thank you for that great introduction. I appreciate it very much. I'm sorry we cannot be in person, that we have to use the Zoom rather than the in-person, but that's the realities of where we are. But thank you so much for that introduction. Rachel, thank you for your extraordinary work in the Jewish Federation of Howard County. Very proud to represent you in the United States Senate, very proud of what you do, the Federation, not just for the Jewish community of Howard County, but what you do for the general community. And your work is so important today. As a result of COVID-19, the challenges are much, much greater. And we know that. And you have stepped up to meet those needs. And we thank you very much. Yes, government has responsibilities. And I would argue that we have not done anywhere near what we should be doing as a government to deal with COVID-19. But the Federation has said, look, we're going to do our share, and you've done more than your share. So thank you very much. I know this is the kickoff to your campaign. I'm a strong supporter of the Federation. I'm proud of the Federation in Baltimore that my family's been extremely active in my entire life before I was born. So it is so important, the work that you are doing. Let me talk a little bit about COVID-19, because to me, that's probably our most urgent need right now. Today, I was on the phone just before this call in an effort to try to get a COVID package enacted before Congress adjourns later this year. And let me talk a little bit about this. Uh, the federal government did not do what it should have done. We had inconsistent messages from the President of the United States as it relates to a game plan, as it relates to wearing masks, as it relates to testing, as it relates to developing a capacity to deal with protective equipment, and the list goes on and on and on. At the state level, Governor Hogan has responded, I think, in a very strong manner to deal with COVID-19, to keep the people of Maryland safe. And the contrast between what some of our governors have done and what the president has done is pretty dramatic. Congress did step up to the plate to deal with the issue when we passed the CARES Act, and we did that in mid-March. The CARES Act was a bipartisan bill, near unanimous vote in the United States Congress. And we put aside our partisan differences. We invested over $2 trillion to deal with the COVID response. It was the right program at that time. It provided substantial funds to deal with the needs that were out there. We provided money for the healthcare community. We called it the Marshall Plan for Healthcare. It not only provided money for our healthcare providers, it provided money for testing, for vaccine development, and the list goes on and on, for emergency health, for public health facilities. We provided help for state and local government because we knew that they were going to be stressed by COVID-19, including a substantial funds for our local education agencies so that we could have the safe operations of our schools, whether it were done virtually, in person, or a hybrid system. We helped American families through a check that we sent to every family, a stimulus check, by expanding unemployment benefits, not only eligibility, but amount, with an extra $600 a week. A substantial program to help small businesses. I crafted that program along with Senator Rubio. It was bipartisan and provided substantial help for small businesses and larger companies in this country. That was passed in mid-March. When we passed that bill, we really thought that this pandemic would be behind us by last summer, that our economy would be recovering certainly by the summer and fall. Well, that was not the case. And it became apparent by mid-May that we needed to do more than just the CARES Act. And that's why the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act in mid-May of this year to provide the next installment of help. That bill was never considered on the floor of the United States Senate, and obviously was not enacted. The House updated their bill in September, recognizing that we had already passed a large period of time. They updated it, and they made it more focused, and they reduced the costs of the program. Again, Senate Leader McConnell never brought the bill to the floor of the United States Senate. We went to the elections. We thought we could get it done by then. Didn't pass. Well, now it's urgent. When I say urgent, we're in crisis. The COVID pandemic is escalating. Our hospitals are being stressed beyond their capacities. Our small businesses are in danger of many have already closed. It's estimated we could lose as many as 1 out of every 3 small businesses in this country if no additional help is provided by the government. People are losing their homes. People are stressed. Our economy, our state and local governments don't have the resources to respond to these needs. And the list goes on and on and on of what we need to do in order to help our communities. So it's absolutely essential that we pass another round of COVID relief. As I said earlier, I was on the phone today with a group of senators and delegates, senators and House members that are working in a bipartisan way to try to get a bill done. It's called the 908 bill because it's $908 billion. And I think we have a chance to get it done this week or next. And we're going to fight hard to get this done. It's absolutely essential that we get these funds done. I'll just give you one example. We know that, and you see this in the Federation, people are in desperate need of services for mental health. We see that mental health and addiction services are much higher right now because of COVID-19. We got to provide the resources just to keep our people healthy. I think the key message for all of us, and you've heard this over and over again by our public health experts, we've got to stay focused on getting this COVID-19 under control. We got to be disciplined to keep distancing, to avoid these large gatherings, to wear a mask, because the vaccine's on its way and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to be vigilant. Before COVID-19, the amount of rise of anti-Semitism in America and around the world was reaching historic levels. The FBI has reported that the amount of hate crime in America is at an all-time high over the last decade. 7,300 reported cases of hate crimes in America last year. The Jewish community is the #1 target for faith-based hate crimes. And we have seen a rise in these types of activities, hate crimes and anti-Semitism, as we've seen a rise of nationalism. Nationalism has spurred growth in white supremacists, and it is also seen a significant increase in anti-migrant populations are also being targeted. I am the special representative of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Parliamentary Assembly on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. And I've had a chance to see what's happening around the world on the rise of anti-Semitism. Just this past month in Hungary, we saw another use of anti-Semitism in order to try to get support in their elections. It's not an isolated example. We are seeing the seeds being planted today that puts us all at risk. We need to concentrate on how we can do much better. But it starts with taking care of business at home. We know we have systemic problems here in America. Yes, in policing, and we've all witnessed exactly what has happened, and we saw the national demonstrations of diversified Americans saying it's time for us to end systemic racism in policing. But it's also beyond policing. If you take a look at the consequences of COVID-19, minority communities have been hit much harder than the rest of the communities. We have systemic discrimination in healthcare. We have systemic discrimination in our economy and in housing. Our federal delegation has sponsored several, are working very hard on several specific examples on how we're trying to protect the Jewish community from the rise of these types of activities. The Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which is currently funded at $90 million, we are optimistic that we're going to see a fourfold increase in those funds for nonprofit organizations, including in the Jewish community, to protect against violence. We hope to get those funds up to $360 million. Earlier this year, we passed the Never Again Education Act. I was proud to be one of the sponsors of that bill. It provides for Holocaust education through the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. I'm on the board of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. So we are taking active steps to try to deal with the rise of anti-Semitism. As Betsy pointed out, I serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. When I first got to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, my chairman was a guy named Joe Biden, who was really a great person for me to work with in regards to that Senate committee. There is no doubt that there is strong support in the United States Congress, in both parties, in the executive branch and in the legislative branch, for the U.S.-Israel relation. It's a special relation that goes back to 1948 when Harry Truman, against the advice of his own State Department, recognized the new state of Israel. This year, we will approve the full security funding for Israel, the missile defense for Israel, and completely comply with the memorandum of understanding between our countries as it relates to U.S. support. There is no controversy in the passage of that legislation. That's a testament on how far we've come in building the solid support for the relationship between the United States and Israel. The United States has been in the forefront to stop the isolation of Israel by the global community. I applaud President Trump in his initiative that brought UAE and Bahrain into a situation where they recognize the state of Israel. That is really good news, because the less we see Israel isolated, the stronger Israel's security becomes. I am very encouraged by the Biden administration and their commitment to global diplomacy. We need to return US leadership to the global stage. And clearly under President Trump, we have been isolated from global issues. US leadership is needed in regards to climate, in regards to health, in regards to security, but also in regards to Israel. We need the United States working with our allies to counter the BDS, boycott, divestment, sanction movement, which is aimed to delegitimize the state of Israel. We need to stop the hostile attitude at the United Nations against Israel. And the United States needs to improve its diplomacy at the United Nations. We need to advance the two-state solution. It's the only solution, a Jewish state, Palestinian state, living side by side in peace. And the United States must return as the broker to get the two parties together to negotiate that agreement. And we need to make sure that as we advocate for this relationship, we never use Israel as a political wedge issue. We should be proud that Israel has the strong support from Democrats and Republicans. And we should never try to challenge the support that we have that is bipartisan. The United States is going to face many global challenges that are going to be left on the plate for President Biden. Let me just mention a few of those, and then we can talk about that in question and answer. China is by far our greatest economic threat. Make no mistake about it, China is trying to determine the global rules on economic activity. They want trade to be determined based upon a government-controlled economy, not our free market economy. They are trying to spread their economic dominance through the entire world and to change the rules for engagement. They steal our intellectual property, they manipulate, and we need to have a strong policy to counter that, working with our allies. We need to be united in our efforts to try to deal with China so that they play on a fair playing field. Russia has a direct desire to bring down democratic states. Make no mistake about it. I authored a report 2 years ago in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, talked about Mr. Putin and his asymmetric arsenal. He'll use any means, propaganda, he'll use military, he'll use supporting gang activities, anything he can to influence elections, to try to bring down democratic institutions. We need to be prepared, working with our allies, to counter the influence of Russia. And then there's Iran. I had concerned about the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement. I thought that it should have been more comprehensive, dealing with enrichment, and it should have dealt with issues that other than just the nuclear activities of Iran. The Iran agreement was entered into, and Iran was in full compliance with the nuclear agreement. President Trump decided to withdraw. I strongly disagreed with his decision to withdraw from an agreement in which Iran was in compliance. What it did was isolate the United States, not Iran. All you have to do is look at the vote at the United Nations on August the 14th on the ballistic missile extension to find that the United States not only couldn't get China and Russia to join us, we couldn't get our traditional allies to join us on this vote. We've isolated America where we should be isolating Iran. We need to re-engage, and I'm certain that President Biden will re-engage in the nuclear agreement. That's the right decision. Then work with our traditional allies, UK and France, and now Germany and EU, to isolate Iran's non-nuclear violations of activities. We could do that. They're willing to do that. I've had conversations with the representatives of these countries. And yes, we have to make sure that Iran never becomes a nuclear weapon state, and that the agreement is lifetime. It should have no limitations at all. I think that's going to be one of the key objectives of the Biden administration. I think there's reason for optimism as we end 2020. We got to get rid of this year. We got to get into a new year. We can't, we got to put this behind us. I think that you're going to see that the Biden administration will re-engage the international community based upon our traditional values, our values of democracy, our values of human rights, of good governance, of respect for all. And I think that engagement will first be with our allies so that we can have a common ability to advance these values globally. And in our strategic relations with countries that don't necessarily agree with us on all issues, those discussions and partnerships will take place based upon advancing our values. I think that's what you're going to see under the Biden administration, and I'm excited about that. So once again, I thank you for everything you do to help our community. You do a great job at that. I thank you for furthering the core values of our Jewish tradition of Tikkun Olam and tzedakah and repairing our world and helping everyone else. And I hope you all have a very, very happy Hanukkah. And I hope that you get all of the Hanukkah nakas that you can, and we get through this year, get into next year, get those vaccines, and next year, God willing, we can meet in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. This is Ralph Grunewald, Ben, Executive Director of the Jewish Federation. I think last time we saw each other personally, I was working as David Trone's Jewish Affairs Advisor, if you remember that.
I did.
We had a number of questions submitted, and some on the chat and some are ahead of time. One question that came ahead of time really deals with your identity as a Jew. And the question was, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing the Jewish community as well as our greatest opportunities as a Jewish community?
Well, you know, the Jewish community is not monolithic. I think a lot of people think that because we all believe the same. We don't. I think that the most important challenges we have is our unity. We recognize that we have to figure out a way that we can have different views without being accusative of the others. So I think that's one of the serious issues I see developing. As I said earlier, I worry about, as I see, partisan Jews trying to use Israel as a political wedge issue. I think that's a major mistake. There are just not enough Jews in America, and there are too many issues that are out there that if we are divided on Israel, that means that there's going to be significant competition as to how much attention and priority the U.S.-Israel relations will have in this country. Now, don't misunderstand me. We can have different views. That's healthy. In Israel, they have a different view for every one of its citizens. And certainly it's all right to criticize your government. I love the United States, and I'm very happy to see Donald Trump leaving office. So it's all right to criticize the leadership in Israel. It's all right to criticize the leadership of the United States. But the core value of the United States, the core value of Israel, that relationship and how important it is, I think it's important that we show unity in our support for Israel.
Thank you, Ben. Another question submitted ahead of time before I get to the chat was, can you say a few words about the relationship between the Jewish community in Maryland with the Black community, as well as Asian Americans, Latinos, Muslim Americans living in Maryland? How can we strengthen our relations as a Jewish community with those other groups?
That's a great question, and I spent a lot of time on that. I think it was interesting. I hosted a meeting on anti-Semitism during the last meeting of the OSCE. It was held in Europe, and we had a sidebar meeting on the growth of anti-Semitism and how we had to deal with it. And we had other minorities who were present during that, and they made this point that the only way that we're going to stop the rise of anti-Semitism is to stop the rise of hate. And the only way you can stop the rise of hate is to understand all marginal groups have a common problem, whether they're Muslim, whether they're African American, whether they're LGBTQ community. We all have or migrants, we all have a similar trait that those who hate us hate all of us. And if we don't work in unity, then we're not going to be able to be as effective as we need to be. And one of the problems that I felt in trying to advance strategies against anti-Semitism is that people just don't know each other. So more of the interfaith, intercultural exchanges are critically important, particularly among young people. So what we really do need to do is reach out. Historically, we know that the civil rights movement in the United States for African Americans was strongly supported by the Jewish community. There was the coalitions that developed. We know that, but that's history. What's the future? And I think the future we have to work on. We really need to establish those close ties and listen as to why there's friction in our communities today. Some of the best meetings I've had have been with the Muslim community. I've had several significant discussions, and unless you understand their fears and concerns, we really need to do a better job at that. So we got to work on the intercultural, interfaith coalitions because we have a common agenda, and working together, we can achieve that agenda.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. You had mentioned earlier bipartisanship as an issue, and one of the questions on the chat was about the relationship with Senator McConnell. So what are your thoughts about the prospects of bipartisan collaboration with the new administration and the new Congress?
It's going to be a challenge. I'm going to tell you that because we have deep divisions, and clearly Senator McConnell, we know what he did when President Obama was elected, that he's the week that President Obama took his oath, he was Leader McConnell was already plotting on how to disrupt the Obama administration. So there are deep problems that we have to work with. But here's the good news. Democrats and Republicans like each other, and we work together on Capitol Hill. So I was able to get major global human rights legislation accomplished, and my partner was the late Senator John McCain. Now, maybe John McCain and I share the same hairdo, but beyond that, we didn't share much in common. And yet we were able to come together on human rights. My friend today is Roger Wicker on human rights, a Republican from Mississippi. And we're getting some really good things done on that front. Rob Portman from Ohio, a Republican, I'm working with him on pension issues. And we're going to get some major legislation enacted. So I go right on down the line, Marco Rubio on small business, a Republican from Florida. So the members know we need to work together, and we do work together. It's our leaders. And our leaders have really pulled us apart because it seems like all they're interested in is the next election. Now, here's the good news. Joe Biden understands all this. He's a product of the United States Senate. He knows how to get things accomplished in the Senate. Guess how many times I went to the White House when President Obama was president to talk about issues? The answer is about once every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe once a month, depending on the season, but certainly over a dozen times a year. Guess how many times I went to the White House when President Bush was president of the United States? The answer is almost the same number of times I was in the White House, where he worked with us to try to bring about legislation. Guess how many times I've been in the White House with President Trump? One time.
Wow.
One time. It was
Wow.
early in his administration. One time we were
Wow.
together, and by the way, we didn't even talk about issues, we just had lunch together. And then it was all about his ego at that lunch. We were supposed to be there to talk about foreign policy, but we never really got around to talking about foreign policy. And by the way, the same thing's true with the Republicans. They haven't been at the White House either for really substantive discussions. So Biden understands that you got to work together and you got to bring people in before you develop policy. They got to be there to help you to develop that policy. And you got to listen. So I have a great deal of confidence that there's going to be a different way of doing business in Washington today, that you're not going to find a president solely concerned about his own ego or his own politics, but a president who really is interested in what's right for this country. And I think you'll see a better day, but it's going to be difficult because of the way our nation has been split along political lines and just the frustration and fear that's out there. So it's going to be hard, but I think Joe Biden's up to the task.
You know how we say, from your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah.
I hope that's the case.
Yeah.
We had a question here about the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. President-elect Biden favored the strengthening of the public option in the ACA, and this was barely defeated the first time when the ACA was passed. And the question is, what is your view of the proposal for passing a public option this time around?
Right. First of all, I strongly support the ACA, and I strongly support a public option. So you understand what a public option is. Those of you who are getting your coverage through the exchange, you are now getting private insurance, but you can get it through the Maryland Exchange, and you're in bigger groups, and you have guaranteed benefits, and you get subsidies based upon your income. So that's the concept of the Affordable Care Act. But every year, these private companies come and go, and they're private. They can make their own decisions. In Maryland, their rates have to be approved by insurance commissioner, but it's a private company. What we wanted to do when we passed the Affordable Care Act is say, in addition to the private companies, that there be a government plan available for you. Not with any additional subsidies. It would compete with the private insurance companies, but every place in this country, there would be a guaranteed government plan that you could rely on. And it would be similar to a Medicare system, but with all the benefits that are included in the exchange programs, but without government subsidies and not in the pool for our seniors and our disabled population. I think that makes abundant sense. It promotes competition. There's always a plan available every place in the country. I support that. I think it'll be very difficult to get that passed in Congress. I just think it is we don't know who's going to control the United States Senate. That decision will be made on January the 5th, the runoff elections in Georgia. We need to win. Democrats need to win both seats that are up in order to be able to get control of the Senate. And then it would be 50-50 with Vice President Harris being the deciding factor. I just think that is not the type of margin we can expand the Affordable Care Act with public insurance options. The Republicans are pretty united against it. So I don't think we can do that. I do think, though, under President Biden, we can strengthen the Affordable Care Act. Under President Trump, he did everything he could to weaken it, including eliminate the penalties and then challenge the constitutionality based upon the penalties not being there. Now, we're going to have a challenge in the courts. We don't know how that's going to come out, but I can tell you that President Biden will be committed to maintaining the Affordable Care Act and strengthening it. But whether we can get a public option, I think he'll try. It won't be the first thing out of the block. He'll try to work on something that is more bipartisan as one of his highest priorities. But we will get around to it. And one day we will strengthen the Affordable Care Act with a public option.
Excellent. We have a number of questions, Ben, foreign policy related. But one has to do with an interesting question. We know, of course, that COVID is now rampant, really, in the United States. We've seen rates like this we've never seen even at the peak of COVID. The question has to do with the U.S. military. Have you been aware of any impact that COVID has had on our military preparedness?
Well, our military has really been very much uh, challenged by COVID-19 because they have close confinement, they have the issues of the spreading of the virus itself. So yes, I mean, I serve on the Naval Academy Board of Visitors. I can tell you it's been a challenge at the Naval Academy in training our new military leaders. They've traditionally been in one dorm building, all of the midshipmen. Now we have them spread out because we don't want to spread the disease. So yes, it's affecting everybody's ability to do everything we need to do. We have an outstanding military. They're the best prepared, best trained, best equipped in the world. They are handling too many responsibilities globally. What's happened in Afghanistan is it's just outrageous. I disagree with the way President Trump is removing our troops, but we need to end our military in Afghanistan. We need to end our military in Iraq. We got to do it in a responsible way. So we're asking our military to do too much. We got to figure out a way that we can do this in a more collaborative way with our allies. But I don't worry at all about the preparedness of our military to meet any challenge. They're there. They have the support. And I must tell you, one of the things that's very clear, as I talked about support for Israel, there's strong bipartisan support to make sure that our military families are treated fairly.
Thank you. The next question, there are several questions regarding Iran and the JCPOA. The first one, we all know how the Israelis basically went and had a clandestine operation. They brought back a number, actually thousands of pages and CDs of secret documents hidden by the Iranians in a warehouse outside of Tehran. And now, of course, we have the assassination of the chief nuclear scientist by an unknown organization. I'm not going to venture who that was, but that might, of course, complicate the relationship between the U.S. And the United States as well. What do you feel needs to be in the new agreement if President Biden goes back to the table and negotiates a new agreement with Iran?
So I think one of the news shows had a special one tonight concerning the Iranian assassination of their nuclear person, connecting it to Israel. I have not been briefed with our intelligence community, so I have no information other than what has been publicly reported. And I would want to know more information. Recognize that Iran has many enemies in the region, in addition to the United States and Israel. You talk to countries such as Saudi Arabia or UAE, or so many countries have very, very bad relations with Iran and look at Iran as their mortal threat. So I'm not sure who's going to, wait to get more information before we cast how that came about. Now, what should our plan be? The two major problems with the Iran nuclear agreement was that it had certain sunsets in it as to requirements on enrichment and on modernization of its equipment. There was no sunset on it for a lifetime prohibition against a nuclear weapons program. That was a commitment made for all time. But there were times, there were periods that the enforcement of those issues would become more difficult. We first should try to expand that so there's no gap in our ability to make sure that Iran does not ever get a nuclear weapon, and not within certainly a year of being able to put together a nuclear weapon. The second thing is that when we went into this agreement, it was limited to the nuclear. But if you don't deal with ballistic missiles are really part of a nuclear program. So we really should look at its arms issues. We should look for its support of terrorism. We should look at its human rights violations. And we should try to get the same coalition that was able to get Iran to give up its ambition for a nuclear weapon to also work to bring in its other nefarious activities. It so happens that China and Russia agree with us on this point. So this is an area where we can get a common agreement with Russia and China, as well as our European partners. So in re-engaging, and I know that President Biden will do this, it's an opportunity, because I've already talked to our the representatives from Europe. They're willing to join President Biden, as long as the United States comes back into the agreement, to work in unison that Iran must not only comply with the nuclear agreement, they must agree to never have a nuclear weapon, which they've already agreed to, but they have to implement that. And then they need to work on eliminating or reducing their other wrongful activities. And I think we can get strategic help from China and Russia in doing this. So that's where I hope the major part of the discussion will take place. And by the way, we do that sharing 100% of the information with Israel. Israel disagreed with President Obama entering into the nuclear agreement, but all of the information during those negotiations were shared between the Israelis and the Americans. So they were fully apprised of everything being done. We got to make sure that continues.
Yeah. There was a follow-up question as you were speaking just now, Ben, about the precision-guided missiles that Iran has, and whether you think that would also be included in the bucket of issues that would have to be negotiated with the country.
Oh, absolutely. And it was a major loss that the ballistic missile restrictions in the United Nations were not extended. We lost that vote.
Yeah.
So we got to get back on track to prevent them from modernizing their ballistic missile capacity, because although they're supposedly delivery systems for non-nuclear or more conventional weapons, it doesn't take much to change that over to nuclear weapons. So yes, we need to deal with their missile program, and we need to have restrictions on it. And I think we can get that done by working with our allies.
Yeah, that's excellent. We have another question regarding climate change, which affects all of us, obviously. And of course, Senator Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry, has been appointed as the new, I guess, climate czar. I'm not sure what his title will be, but how do you think the Biden administration will be dealing with the global threat of climate change?
Thanks for that question. In 2015, I was in Paris. I headed a delegation of 10 United States senators as we entered into the Paris climate agreement. And it was an historic moment. We were able to get that done because of the leadership from the United States. We found a way to get voluntary commitments, but with global spotlights on everything you're doing to make it really work. And the countries are living up to their Paris commitments. And we have seen progress made globally in dealing with these issues. The United States, by pulling out of the Paris Agreement, lost its seat at the table. And guess who took our seat? China. China became the most dominant player on climate issues. Now, are they interested in dealing with climate change as a challenge of our times, as a moral challenge? And the answer is no. They look at it strictly from economics. They're trying to dominate the economy and therefore want to control the rules for the purposes of their economy. So we got to get back in the driver's seat and work for, and that means we also have to deal with the Green Climate Fund. Let me just explain what that means. This is where the developed world takes resources and puts it into a fund to compensate the developing world for foregoing the abuse to their environment that we did in order to become a developed nation. It's fair. That's been put on hold under the Trump administration. We got to get back to being part of that. And yes, the science on climate change is clear as the science on COVID-19 on what we should be doing. And we should be judged by science. And the good news is that carbon reductions are now well understood. We can become carbon neutral, in the energy sector. We know that. We'll have more challenges in the housing sector, but we can figure out ways to doing in the manufacturing sector. We can become carbon neutral as a globe and reverse the trends that we've seen on climate change.
Thank you, Ben. We have two last questions. I wanted to be mindful of our time. They're very different topics. One is marijuana. In regard to federal legislation that the House passed last week, do you feel it'll ever pass in the Senate? The comment here is this could be a way to help pay off this newest mountain of debt related to COVID and the aftershocks of our economy.
Right. Well, it's not going to pass in this Congress. I think that's clear, and Senator McConnell is very much opposed to it. But I think you have to look at federalism for one moment. You know, the federal government shouldn't dominate everything we do in the world. We have a federalism system. The federal government should respect the rights of the states. And the challenge today is states have legalized marijuana, but because the federal government still has it as a restricted substance, you can't participate in the finance. Banking is more challenging. Criminal statutes are unclear. So it's just wrong for the federal government to say that what states do will not be respected. I think that's inconsistent with the Constitution. So I think if we avoid what the national policy should be at this stage, since there's different plans among different states, ultimately we probably will have a uniform federal law. The most important thing is for the federal government to allow the states to continue to make their own policies as it relates to cannabis.
And the last question has to do with infrastructure and our nation's infrastructure, bridges, roads, you name it. What do you think will be the administration's focus there? There's a lot of talk about infrastructure repair and crumbling infrastructure. How do you think the next 4 years are going to look?
Well, I'm the lead Democrat on infrastructure on the Environment and Public Works Committee. And by the way, Senator Van Hollen also serves on that committee. So we have both of our members serve on the Infrastructure Committee. Senator Van Hollen also serves on the Banking Committee that deals with transit. So we're well situated in the Senate on infrastructure. That includes water infrastructure as well, by the way. We passed last year in the Environment and Public Works Committee a major reauthorization of surface transportation, increased the amount of money being spent. And the vote was unanimous in our committee. Not one person voted against it. It included a very healthy section dealing with climate change, including charging stations for electric vehicles. Every member voted for it. Just repeating that. It included a program that I authored, Transportation Alternative Program, which allows the communities to do their own planning on how you can deal with transportation other than through conventional means. Again, passed unanimously in our committee. So I think there's strong bipartisan support. The challenge is, how do you pay for it? The traditional transportation revenues are not adequate to fund what we need to do. So if we are going to do traditional funding, we're going to have to raise new revenues for it. One source would be a carbon fee, which is, by the way, one in which we have strong business community support for a carbon fee, because you're using the private sector to deal with the problem of carbon emissions, where there's reward for doing it right. Ingenuity is rewarded. So we have, it's a possibility we'll be able to do something in that regard. But there's a second issue. We have spent now over, I guess, close to $3 trillion to try to stimulate our economy during COVID-19. We're now talking about spending another $1 trillion. And I hope we get that done. And part of this is to say we need to create jobs. And the way you create jobs is to prime the pump, put more money into the economy. That's what economists tell you to do. We know coming out of COVID-19, there are going to be many jobs that will not be returning. We know that. Transportation infrastructure, water infrastructure create jobs. So if we look at it as part of our stimulus package to deal with COVID-19, we may be able to get bipartisan agreement for a larger infrastructure plan to modernize sort of what we did coming out of the Great Depression. We rebuilt America. It's the same thing. If we rebuild America, we not only stimulate the economy, we have a more modern infrastructure to deal with the global challenges and the community needs that we have. So I am optimistic this is an area where we will get bipartisan support for robust programs. And I hope we finance part of it. I hope we raise the revenues. But I think part of it can be as a stimulus to rebuild our economy.
Thank you so much, Senator. Before we end, I also want to do a little personal lobbying on behalf of our federation. We were the recipient of a payroll protection plan grant of $92,000. It's been tremendously helpful, as it has to thousands and thousands and thousands of nonprofits around the country. We're still unsure what's happening with loan forgiveness because the rules aren't clear. And I know you're very involved in that. And we're hoping that the SBA and others will clarify those rules. And perhaps in the next round of funding, that can be clarified. And to the extent there will be more funds available for nonprofits who are hurting, of course, you know that something that not just the Jewish community, but every nonprofit really something that we would very much benefit from.
Ralph, the good news here, the Democrats and Republicans have both signed off on both of those points. We've signed off on a simplified loan forgiveness form. We think that what the SBA and Treasury has done is wrong. So they've complicated this much more than we ever intended.
Yep.
The second round of PPP, we both signed off on it, but it's only going to be targeted to those entities that have had significant revenue losses as a result of COVID-19. So I'm not sure you'll qualify as many of the institutions will qualify. Some will, but not all will. You're going to have to demonstrate specific need where you did not have to do that under the PPP program.
That's right.
So the challenge is just getting a COVID bill to the finish line. And that's a challenge with Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump.
Yep.
If we can do that, then I think you'll find some relief on the way.
Thank you, Ben. I think I can speak to every single person on this call, Ben. We are just so fortunate to have Ben Cardin in the U.S. Senate. If everyone could clap, I know you probably could, because you really are a remarkable politician and representative of our state, for our state. And we all want to thank you for everything you've done, not just what you're currently doing, but all the years you spent in the House, and even before that, in the House of Delegates in Annapolis. But since you've been in the Congress, it's just been fantastic. Every time we call in your office, you have a fantastic staff. They're so responsive. So Ben, thank you for your time tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed this opportunity to meet with our senior senator, Ben Cardin. He really is someone we should be very proud of. And thank you for everything. Before we sign off, I just want to hear from Susan. Is there anything else we wanted to say tonight, or try to just end it here? I wasn't sure what the plan was.
Oh, just thank you so much, Senator Cardin, and thank you everyone for joining us. I just put in the chat a link if you'd like to join us for our next event, which is Latka Vodka, and it's going to be a bit more of a chance for us to all chat together. And I promise it's kind of a new Zoom experience that we're trying. Please join us. And thank you, everyone else.
And by the way, you know, I don't know whether she's on, but Jackie Norden, I think was planning to be on. I know that's Marina's cousin. Your lovely wife, Marina's cousin. I don't know whether she actually made it on the call, but when we told her that you're on the call, she was very excited. So please give our regards to Marina, from Jackie, and from all of us.
I will. Again, stay well, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And happy Hanukkah. Join us if you can with the county executive event as well. Good evening.